Hey everyone! Before we get started, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Alright, let's jump into today's video. The case of Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett. For nearly 5 decades, a notorious slaying case has plagued Australian detectives until the perpetrator was finally arrested. On January 13, 1977, best friends, Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett, from Collingwood, Victoria, were found lifeless in their home on Easy Street in Melbourne, Australia. Suzanne had been stabbed 27 times and was also assaulted. Her then 16-year-old son was left unharmed and had been unattended in his cot when the police located their bodies. Susan was found face down near the front door with 55 stab wounds and showed signs of self-defense and attempts to escape. The bathtub and towels near the back of the house showed evidence that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up before leaving via the back door. There were no signs of forced entry, though a footprint on the front windowsill indicated a possible entry point. The kitchen light was left on and the weapon was not found. The two friends were last seen alive on the evening of January 10th. DNA was collected from the scene and stored. But the case, dubbed the Easy Street slayings, unfortunately, went cold. 40 years later, in 2017, Victoria Police had offered a $1 million reward to solve the double slaying case after a reinvestigation of the case. Suzanne's sister, Gail Armstrong, said that the reward was well overdue. She said the reward would bring relief. "It is half a lifetime we have lost. Here is $1 million. Just say something." There was a person of interest in the case and he agreed to provide a DNA sample. But then he fled the country and the police were not able to find him. A DNA test on a family member then matched him to samples taken from the crime scene of the brutal slaying of Suzanne and Susan. The case went cold again as he could not be located. The breakthrough finally came 7 years later. The detectives found out that accused double perpetrator and offender, 65-year-old Perry Curumblies, had been living in Greece since 2017. Curumblies could not be arrested while he was in Greece due to the country's 20-year statute of limitation on initiating slaying charges. So undercover officers lured him to Rome. In late November 2020, 3 of Victoria's most senior detectives landed in the Italian capital 16,000 kilometers from where the crimes took place in 1977. The historic, majestic, and famous city of Rome would be the last place the Victoria Police would have thought their biggest breakthrough would happen in possibly their state's most infamous, baffling, and brutal cold case slaying. After the breakthrough arrest, Victorian Police Commissioner Shane Patton described the case as an absolutely gruesome, horrific, frenzied slaying. He said, "For over 47 years, detectives from the squad have worked tirelessly to determine who was responsible for taking the lives of Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett. This was a crime that struck at the heart of our community, 2 women in their own home where they should have felt their safest." Patton also recognized the enduring resilience of both the Armstrong and Bartlett families who have grieved for over 4 decades. And no doubt, this will be a very emotional time for them. The Curumblies family lived on Bendigo Street, less than 300 meters away from the house where the 2 women were slain. Curumblies was 17 years old at the time and was a student at the same school where Susan worked as an arts and crafts teacher. In the weeks after the slayings, Curumblies was stopped by Ron Idles, who was then a junior police officer, but went on to be one of the most respected detectives in Victoria police history. Curumblies was said to have an alibi for the day the women lost their lives. On December 2, 2024, Curumblies boarded a commercial Qatar Airways flight from Rome to Doha. He was the first to board the Boeing 787 and was seated at the back of the aircraft. There were 2 detectives seated next to him, and in front of him sat the boss of Victoria's detective squad, Dean Thomas. When the plane touched down, everyone on board exited the aircraft, but Curumblies was the last to get off. He was kept in a holding cell before boarding the 13-and-a-half-hour flight to Melbourne. When the plane finally landed in Melbourne, Curumblies was, this time the first to exit flanked by the officers. He was then formally questioned over the alleged slayings of best friends, Suzanne and Susan. Curumblies will formally be charged with 2 counts of slaying and 1 count of assault during his next court appearance. Suzanne's sister, Gail, has spent every day waiting for news of the arrest. She said, "I just thought one day. The police were so persistently consistent, I knew that it would happen one day." The case of Kamal Kalanovic. In the Bronx, in New York, on New Year's Eve in February 2006, the tragic demise of a professional welterweight boxer broke the hearts of his family, friends, and the community. The person responsible was able to evade the police for 18 years, until one day when he was caught and brought to justice. Kamal Kalanovic was a boxer that loved the fighting life, even though the pay and benefits were not always great. At the age of 28, his 9 years career record was fairly unremarkable with 10 victories, 6 losses, and 2 draws. According to a friend, Kamal was an all-out brawler. Not much of a technical boxer, but he always had a blast just throwing punches. And he was good at it. His friend also said that it was hard for him to get fights with his style. He made his opponents look stupid. On December 31, 2006, Kamal lost his life after a barroom brawl in which the police said he had not participated. Sometime after 4:30 a.m., he was run over by a man driving a sports utility vehicle. The man was fleeing the Moonlight restaurant and bar on Belmont Avenue, where he and others had argued over which Albanian surnames were most associated with tougher and generally superior people. The men had taken the fight outside. Kamal, who was at the Moonlight with an uncle, Tony Mujovic, had eventually followed them onto the sidewalk and joined a group that had gathered perhaps just to see what was going on, or perhaps to try to get them to break it up. One of the men climbed into a dark sport utility vehicle and plowed into the crowd. He hit Kamal with his car. That threw Kamal head first into a tree and fled the scene and disappeared to the Balkans in Eastern Europe. The EMS responded and took him to St. Barnabas Hospital, where he was pronounced deceased shortly after. On the surveillance footage that was recovered from the scene, Kamal can be seen with his hand in his pockets, wanting to go home. His back was towards the Mitsubishi SUV. He did not stand a chance, as he did not see the car coming. The case into Kamal's slaying went cold as the man responsible for Kamal's demise could not be found for 18 years. Early in 2024, the Bronx DA's office issued an international red notice arrest warrant, and U.S. Marshals joined forces with local law enforcement in Kosovo, Serbia to finally apprehend 42-year-old Ahmet Gashi. Gashi was then picked up by the Serbian police and was transferred to the ward of the U.S. Marshals. The police identified Gashi as a suspect within days of the slaying. On December 13, 2024, he arrived at Central Booking in the Bronx. He was charged with second-degree slaying. Kamal's best friend, Elver Morici, hopes the arrest of the suspect after 18 will bring some solace to the victim's family. He said, "When they hear the news, I am sure they will be relieved a little bit. They are not bringing nothing back, to be honest, but at the same time, it will make them feel better." The case of Egbert Mano Stewart. In November 2024, 52-year-old Love was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with 5 years suspended to probation. Elkhart County Deputy Prosecutor Anna Rich said it was good to finally get closure on Robert's slaying and thanked the slaying unit for its diligence. She said, "Reed was an older gentleman and his life certainly mattered. He had dignity, which was not respected by Mr. Love in any way. A man was slain, and the perpetrators quickly attracted the attention of the investigators. But it took another 10 years and DNA analysis before a judge said that the police had enough evidence to obtain arrest warrants for the pair. In February 2005, businessman Egbert Mano Stewart was found fatally stabbed in his Heritage Hills condo on St. Thomas in the Caribbean, with a large kitchen knife sticking out of his neck. 63-year-old Egbert was a popular businessman who owned Mano's restaurant, adjacent to the Fort Christian parking lot. On the morning of June 22, 2005, his wife, Vivian Stewart, called the police and said that she had returned home to find her husband deceased in a pool of blood. 6 days later, someone, identified in a police affidavit only as a concerned citizen, called the police to tell them that Vivian was having an affair with Jacques Cajuste. Both were Haitian nationals. Vivian and her lover Jacques quickly attracted the attention of the investigators. The police interviewed Cajuste on June 30th, and he stated that he and Vivian Stewart were co-workers involved in an intimate relationship. Cajuste moved to Pennsylvania a month later, and the police interviewed additional witnesses in February. The police could not find enough evidence to make an arrest, and the case went cold. Almost 10 years later, DNA analysis concluded that Cajuste was a major contributor of the DNA found in the hallway and bedroom where Egbert was slain. The cold case squad took up the case for further investigation in March 2015, and the police finally arrested and charged Vivian Stewart and Cajuste in 2016, more than 11 years after Egbert's slaying. Cajuste was arrested in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and Vivian was arrested in St. Thomas by members of the Cold Case Squad and Investigation Bureau. Prosecutors with the Virgin Island Attorney General's office filed court documents on September 25, 2019, charging Cajuste with 8 crimes, including first-degree slaying, second-degree slaying, and 6 charges related to use of a dangerous weapon and assault. There is no statute of limitations in the Virgin Island Code for certain serious crimes, including slaying, felony child abuse and neglect, felony crimes, embezzlement of public money, and falsification of public records. But all other felony crimes must be charged within 3 years of the offense, and misdemeanor arrests must be made within 1 year. Judge Francois agreed with Cajuste's defense attorney that the statute of limitations had elapsed for all but the slaying charges. And Cajuste did not flee justice or attempt to live in hiding before his 2016 arrest, which could have triggered a lifting of the time limits. Judge Francois ruled in 2020 that outside of the one interview in February, the people failed to provide evidence that they attempted to interview Cajuste again. Their trials were delayed for 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and Judge Francois issued another opinion, denying Cajuste's motion to dismiss the remaining slaying counts. Judge Francois found that there is no statute of limitations for slaying charges, and Cajuste's right to due process was not substantially prejudiced by the delay. Retired Virgin Island Police Department officers Delbert Phipps Sr., Rosalind Bedminster, and Daphne Rouse-Carty returned to the Virgin Islands to testify. Virgin Island Police, Major Crimes Officers, Sergeant Mario Stout and Detective Nigel James, also assisted with the investigation of the cold case. A false start by the prosecution led to another 6 years of legal wrangling before Stewart and Cajuste finally reached trial on August 1, 2022. The prosecution proved to the jury that on the night of June 21, 2005 and into the morning of June 22, both defendants, Cajuste and Vivian Stewart, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation unlawfully participated in causing the demise of Egbert Stewart by multiple stab wounds. A Virgin Islands Superior Court jury found them guilty of first-degree slaying and abetting on August 11, 2022. Virgin Island Attorney General Denise George said in a written statement, "Justice has finally been served, and I commend our DOJ prosecution team and the Virgin Islands Police Department, former and current investigators, and cold case squad for their excellent work. This case required the teamwork of the DOJ with the VIPD and a relentless determination to bring the perpetrators to justice." She added, "Much gratitude also to the witnesses who came forward. We want our community to know that just because a case is 17 years old, it does not mean we stop investigating. I truly hope this provides some degree of comfort and closure to Mr. Egbert Stewart's loved ones." On January 19, 2023, 63-year-old Vivian Stewart was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is unclear what 60-year-old Jacques Cajuste's sentence was, but he also faced a mandatory life prison sentence without the possibility of parole. the case of Robert. A man tragically lost his life in February 2002. Thanks to witnesses coming forward, the person responsible was finally arrested and brought to justice. On May 22, 2002, in Elkhart County, Indiana, 59-year-old Robert Reed was found savagely beaten till his end in his home. He was found by his neighbor when she checked in on him after she noticed his front door was left wide open. The injuries Robert had sustained were so severe that his head was misshapen from the beating. There was a large amount of blood under his head and a sizable cut above his right eye, which was swollen. When the police responded to the scene on the 600 block of South 3rd Street, the forensics were unsure where to start testing first as there was so much blood splattered around the house. There were blood stains located on the bathroom and kitchen floor, as well as on the inside of the deadbolt of the front door. It seemed that there was a struggle in the bedroom as the furniture had been thrown around. An autopsy found that Robert lost his life due to the multiple injuries to his head and neck. His demise was officially ruled as a slaying. Unfortunately, the case did not garner many leads and eventually went cold as all the blood they had tested from the crime scene came back as a match to the victim and not his attacker. In 2021, 19 years later, an unnamed witness spoke to the police and said that Marcus Love had confided in them not long after the attack had taken place, that he was responsible. The witness mentioned that they noticed he had blood on his clothes and multiple cuts on his fingers when they were speaking. After investigating these claims, the police came across another witness who confirmed that Marcus used to be friends with Robert and even stayed at his house regularly to take illegal substances together. However, the police were not able to get a conviction based on two witness statements. They needed some concrete evidence. In 2011, the police had actually interviewed Marcus in connection with Robert's demise, where he denied personally knowing Robert, but admitted that he recognized him from occasionally seeing him on the Faith Mission, a local charity that provides help to people in need. When interviewed again in 2021, after the two witnesses had come forward with statements that did not correlate with Marcus's story, he denied being in the residence at that time, but later admitted he went to Robert's home frequently. He denied ever getting into a physical fight with him. Sergeant Greg Harder decided to review the evidence of the crime scene with fresh eyes. When he was looking through the photos, he noticed a blood-stained area of Robert's shirt that looked like it had dropped onto him from someone else, whilst Robert was laying on the ground. It was not a pattern of blood that was consistent with belonging to the victim, as it was clearly blood droplets on the back of the shirt. A partial DNA profile was found, and when tested, it was confirmed that it was a mixture of two people's blood, Robert Reed's and Marcus Love's. After this discovery, the police presented the evidence to Love, who changed his story for the third time, stating that he could not remember whether or not he had actually gotten into a physical fight with Robert. When looking for a probable cause, they took note that Robert's wallet had been emptied, and with Love being an addict, they theorized that Love beat him after Robert refused to give him any more money for illegal substances. In August 2022, Love was charged with 1 count of slaying. Love admitted that he violently robbed Robert in February 2002. He expressed remorse before his sentence was handed down. He said, "I wish I could take it back. This has changed my life, changed my kid's life. I ask for leniency, for mercy of the court. Please forgive me for what I have done." Love entered his plea on October 17, 2024, just days before his second jury trial. A mistrial had been declared in July, the morning after jurors were seated and had listened to opening arguments. He pleaded guilty to an amended charge of robbery resulting in serious injury, a class of felony, as part of an agreement that saw the slaying charge dismissed. The case of Virginia Cecilia Farrell. A lady's life was taken in her own home in 1997. It took almost 22 years before DNA advancements helped to crack the case and bring the perpetrator to justice. On May 16, 1997, 79-year-old Virginia Cecilia Farrell was discovered beaten and stabbed till her end in her Clay Township home in Michigan. DNA evidence was collected at the crime scene at the time, but the police had no leads and the case went cold. 10 years later, in 2007, an initial Michigan State Police cold case investigation developed a DNA profile, but no suspects were identified. A second cold case investigation was started 12 years later in 2019, and thanks to advancements in DNA technology, the case was finally cracked. The initial evidence that was collected in 1997 gave the police a lead. The suspect in the case was identified as 54-year-old John Germain of Heartland. He was arrested by Michigan State Police at his home in August 2022. Germain is charged with open slaying, first-degree criminal conduct, and breaking and entering a building with intent. He was being held on $1 million bond. Amy Goodrich, an assistant prosecuting attorney, said that Germain had family in the area where the crime took place. During Germain's testimony, he told the jury that he did not assault or take the life of Virginia. He said that he was living with his parents at the time of the slaying down the street from her Harkey's Court home in Clay Township. His words were, "By the truth of the Holy Spirit in the name of Jesus, I did not end her life." His attorney asked him if he ever had any arguments with Virginia, to which he said he did not. He said he was at home on May 16, 1997, and he noticed his dogs were barking loudly, but that nothing else significant happened that night. When he was questioned by prosecutor Gilead, he became flustered. Gilead asked him how he could remember his dogs barking on a night 26 years ago, and why he had not told the police after the slaying was reported. Gilead also questioned Germain about his DNA at the scene, including a hair found on Virginia's body. Germain said he had no idea why the hair was there or why his DNA was found under her fingernails. He suggested that his DNA could have gotten under her nails after she visited his parents' house, and that she must have scratched the furniture in their home, which had his DNA on it. Both Gilead and defense attorney Frederick Lepley focused on the DNA evidence in the case: the hair, the DNA under the fingernails, and a matching haplotype associated with the Y chromosome that also matched Germain. Gilead told the jury it was lucky the case could be prosecuted, as much of the DNA could not have been compared in 1997. He said the Michigan State Police investigated a wide range of suspects close to Virginia, and only Germain was a match for the DNA samples. In arguing that the slaying was premeditated, Gilead showed the jury pictures of Virginia's body, which had been stabbed 24 times on the chest, head, neck, and hands. Gilead said the attacker cut through Virginia's window screens to enter the house. She had been partially undressed in an apparent assault, which the prosecutors said all showed the attacker was acting with intent. Gilead told the jurors, "Think of this woman, her life, and how it was taken from her in this humiliating way." Lepley, however, said that several of the expert witnesses said that there were other DNA samples from the scene that were never tested. He said that witnesses told the jury DNA on her underwear was found to have come from 4 sources. There were 2 other unidentified sources of DNA under her fingernails besides Germain's, and there were 5 other hairs that were not tested, in addition to the one that matched his client. Lepley said, "We probably all have hairs on us, which we do not know where they came from." Gilead said during rebuttal that those 5 other hairs were from a woman and were likely from Virginia's body. Lepley said that the DNA match from the swabs also left room for doubt because it was based on a haplotype taken from a male Y chromosome. Instead of being a perfect match for Germain, Lepley said, it simply did not rule him out. The same haplotype would match one in every 1,200 men. Lepley also noted that there was no bruising found around Virginia's private parts and no male DNA samples or stains. Lepley said, "I do not think they have proven there was an actual assault or penetration." Germain was previously charged with the first-degree criminal conduct, but the charge was dropped at the prosecution's request 2 weeks before the trial. Gilead said that he wanted to reduce the amount of evidence the jury had to consider, reducing the likelihood the case would end in a hung jury as the first trial did. Gilead told the jury during rebuttal the case was an easy decision, saying the idea that Germain's hair got on the victim by chance was beyond belief. particularly given there was no suggestion that Germain ever met her while she was wearing her nightgown. None of the other hairs were found on her. In September 2023, the verdict came after Germain testified and the attorneys gave their closing arguments. It was a second jury trial after the first one resulted in a hung jury. 55-year-old Germain was found guilty of first-degree slaying after an hour of deliberation. St. Clair County Chief Assistant Prosecutor Stephen Gullia said he was glad to get the verdict. He said, "I am very happy that justice was done, and very happy for Virginia's family and friends. This is something they have lived with for 26 years, and they finally have closure." On November 6th, as Circuit Court Judge Cynthia Lane sentenced John Germain to life in prison without parole, he maintained his innocence to the end. Germain told the court the following, when given the opportunity to make a statement. "This is wrong. Nothing I can say is going to change anything. But it was not me." Judge Lane told the court that life without parole was the only sentence she could give under the law. Both the defense and prosecution chose not to make any arguments at the sentencing, though Lepley said that Germain would appeal the verdict. Mark Farrell, Virginia's grandson, read a prepared statement to the court, saying that her friends and family suffered not only because of her demise, but also because of the time it took to find justice. Mark said, "A popular saying when somebody passes away is time heals all wounds. Your Honor, I am still waiting to heal." He asked the judge to imprison Germain for life, saying that he had already lived more than 20 years without facing punishment for the slaying. The case of Don Hatney, December 26, 1997. During the early morning hours in East Bremerton, Washington, a neighbor noticed smoke coming from the Hatney residence and alerted the other neighbors. It didn't take long before a 911 call was made and authorities rushed to the scene. Authorities arrived and got the fire under control, only to then make a grueling discovery, accompanied by a smell of burning flesh that made them fear the worst. Inside, they unfortunately found the body of a 28-year-old woman, whom the neighbors immediately recognized as Don Hatney. Her husband, Nick Hatney, had gone for a hunting trip with friends, and around 10 a.m., he came back home with their dog, only to find the house had been on fire and his wife had died as a result of it. Initially ruled as an accidental fire, a gruesome discovery years later would reveal something far more sinister behind it. This is the heartbreaking case of Don Hatney. Dawn Marie Tahara was born on December 5, 1969 in Seattle, Washington to Donald Tahara and Diana Pearl. Donald worked in a shipyard while Diana took care of the home. Dawn was their eldest child and only daughter, and she grew up with her three brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek in Bremerton, Washington. According to her mother, Dawn's devoutness began at an early age with her embracing faith and accepting the Lord into her life when she was 4 years old. During her childhood, Dawn faced hardships due to her parents' struggles with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts. Around 1980, Diana met a new man, prompting her departure from the family to move in with him. This led to the arrival of another baby. However, the relationship hit a snag, forcing Diana alongside her newborn to return to Donald and her other children. Despite these childhood obstacles, Dawn turned all her challenges into doing well in school, dedicating herself to achieving excellent grades. At just 12 years old, she had participated in the Scripps National Spelling Bee, an opportunity that not only led her to the White House, but also allowed her to meet the late former President Ronald Reagan. In 1988, Dawn graduated and achieved the honor of being the valedictorian at Bremerton Christian School before joining the Northwest College of the Assemblies of God in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatney and an immediate connection blossomed between them. However, Dawn's friends grew concerned when she referred to Nick as the man of her life after just a few dates. They hoped their friend would find a partner capable of providing unwavering support and genuine affection, as they perceived Nick as overly assertive and excessively self-confident, qualities they believed did not align well with Dawn's personality. Nick's upbringing was similar to Dawn's in some ways. He was born and raised in Washington, But unlike her, he came from Poulsbo, a coastal city in the state. Nick also faced challenges within his family from a young age. His father, Dan, was deeply immersed in his work as a mechanic and remained distant when at home, neglecting family time and household responsibilities. Meanwhile, his mother Sandra juggled running a home daycare and providing foster care, leaving Nick feeling neglected. He confided in his friends, expressing a sense of being less favored than his siblings and even the foster children, perceiving his mother's feelings toward him as a form of hatred. Struggling through his mother's prolonged bouts of depression and his emotionally distant father, Nick lacked the emotional support or connection he needed from his parents. Despite this isolation, Nick found solace and deepened his involvement in Christianity by seeking comfort in the Bible. While his faith bolstered his self-assurance during his adolescence, it occasionally distanced him from others due to his newfound confidence. Nick and Dawn first met at their shared college. Dawn's friends found it strange that she would show interest in Nick given his contrasting traits. Over time, they noticed a change in Dawn. She had always displayed confidence through her extroverted nature, was self-sufficient and driven, striving to achieve new goals. However, in Nick's presence, she became timid, withdrawn, and indecisive, frequently deferring to Nick's choices even if they conflicted with her preferences or made her uncomfortable. It seemed as though Nick had a negative influence on her rather than bringing out her best self. Despite this, their love endured and their relationship persisted, eventually leading to an engagement after Nick proposed on Alki Beach in 1990. They solidified their commitment with marriage on April 20, 1991 and subsequently moved to Bremerton. At that point, both had completed their degrees. Dawn secured a position as a parole officer while Nick embarked on his role as a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island, situated across the bay from Seattle. Nick had aspired to become a youth pastor, specifically targeting Christ Community Church due to his bond with his former youth pastor, Bob, also known as P.B. Smith. At that time, P.B. Smith remained with the church, having overseen its affairs since the late 1980s, but had now partnered with Pastor Robert Billy Craig in guiding the congregation. P. Smith adopted a more amiable yet conservative approach to church leadership, whereas Pastor Robert was known for his stringent and radical teachings. Throughout their marriage, Nick consistently made decisions without any opposition from Dawn. This was the case because both Nick and Dawn adhere to Christian fundamentalism, a community where the wife is expected to submit to her husband's authority, believing it aligns with God's plan. At Christ Community Church, this ideology was explicitly promoted and deemed acceptable. The church even practiced exorcisms on afflicted members, advocated for families to have as many children as deemed by God, and endorsed homeschooling for these children. Their teachings emphasized women's modesty and addressed uncomfortable inquiries about sex. With speaking out against these norms, risking excommunication from the church, fostering a climate of silence among dissenters driven by fear of expulsion. Dawn and the congregation found themselves deeply involved in what many would consider a cult, with her husband Nick playing a crucial role in the hazardous practices. Nick had shifted his admiration towards Robert and sought direct mentorship under him, moving away from his initial close relationship with P.B. Smith. Dissatisfied with Smith's more relaxed approach, Nick felt he wasn't learning enough and disapproved of what he perceived as leniency, favoring the stringent and extreme methods of Pastor Robert. In contrast, Robert saw Nick as a way to accomplish his own agenda, removing Smith and assuming complete control as the senior pastor of the church by 1997. Dawn and Nick had frequently relocated and resided in properties they refurbished to sell, encountering various home-related issues. Dawn, on the other hand, yearned to establish a family and settle into a permanent residence. To address this, Nick found a fixer-upper in East Bremerton, intending for them to move in, renovate, and make it their home. However, the home purchase, renovations, and their house flipping venture had pushed the couple into debt. Although their outward appearance portrayed a seemingly flawless relationship, with Dawn portrayed as the supportive wife accommodating Nick's desires, underlying issues existed far beyond anyone's perception. Dawn had jokingly requested to a friend about potentially living with her instead of returning to her parents in case he and Nick ended their relationship. Meanwhile, Nick continued accumulating debt by regularly loaning money to fellow church members. He embarked on his ambitious venture of establishing a Christian youth camp, which predictably proved to be financially burdensome. However, fueled by his fervent desire, he fully committed to the project, even beginning to scout properties in Jefferson County, convinced that one of these would serve as the perfect location for the camp. His determination intensified when a congregant, a woman named Sandy Glass, asserted receiving a divine vision, affirming that the property Nick had his eye on was destined to become the site of the youth camp he envisioned. Sandy, a woman in her 20s, had already faced significant hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend had passed away due to an unspecified illness, and her father had died in a construction accident. Additionally, her brother battled with addiction. Sandy was married to a man named Jimmy, and their financial situation had been strained for some time. They relied solely on Jimmy's income as a carpenter, with Sandy staying home to care for their children. Like Nick, Sandy struggled with reckless spending habits, often exceeding their means, resulting in frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These disputes sometimes led Jimmy to express his frustration through yelling or by withdrawing himself from the situation and spending hours at the bar in an effort to address their marital conflicts. The couple sought assistance from the church and started attending marriage counseling sessions, which were led by Nick. At this time, Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for several years. Many congregation members had lodged complaints with Robert about Nick's counseling approach, expressing unease over his tendency to concentrate heavily on intimate inquiries, often disregarding other crucial issues. It seemed that the discussions primarily focused on matters of a sexual nature, overlooking other significant aspects. However, due to the trust they had and the continued affiliation of P.B. Smith with the church, members assumed that Nick's position would not have been entrusted to him if he lacked credibility. By the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert had successfully replaced Smith, assuming the role of senior pastor, a decision that was fully endorsed by the church board. Smith and his wife then departed for Africa to engage in missionary work. Jimmy's parents, who were active church members themselves, felt that Jimmy and Sandy's decision to seek church intervention was too hasty. They also questioned Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. Their concerns deepened when they noticed that Nick seemed to focus more on Sandy individually rather than on the couple as a unit. This heightened attention extended beyond the counseling sessions with prolonged phone conversations and an excessive amount of time spent together, both at the church and even outside the church premises. Jimmy's parents considered the dynamic between Nick and Sandy as inappropriate, noting their extended interactions and increased closeness, which appeared to exceed the typical boundaries of a counselor-client relationship. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, had noticed Nick's conduct and had a private conversation with him, expressing concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advising him to focus on his own marriage. Following numerous complaints, Robert intervened, cautioning Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end. Sandy, feeling a divine connection between herself and Nick, reacted angrily to Robert's counsel. She wrote him a letter expressing her discontent, stating that the judgment she felt from him made it difficult for her to believe that he accepted her gifts or had confidence in her ability to hear God and use it to help anyone. The relationship between Sandy and Nick was already having a negative impact on those around them. Don and Jimmy, along with Jimmy's children from his marriage to Sandy, felt hurt. In fact, one of their children confided in Jimmy, revealing that Nick and Sandy had mentioned Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At the church, Dawn began confiding in her friends about her distress. She revealed her financial troubles and her earnest wish to have children, which her partner Nick strongly opposed. As 1997 was drawing to a close, Nick engaged in relationships with multiple women besides Sandy. He was observed having private conversations and prolonged phone calls with these women concurrently. Sandy's alleged visions became more intense, urging Nick to prioritize the establishment of his youth camp and to devote more time to their relationship, as she believed they were destined to be together. Dawn, on the contrary, made numerous efforts to rekindle Nick's happiness with her, even going to the lengths of attempting to lose some weight. Certain women within the congregation endeavored to console her, affirming that the issues between her and Nick were not a result of her actions, but rather stemmed from Nick himself being the core problem. Regrettably, her life hadn't unfolded as she had envisioned when she entered into marriage with him. Fast forward to Christmas, Dawn woke up feeling unwell. Despite being sick with a cold, she and Nick visited her family, spending the entire day together. Later in the evening, they went to P.B. Smith's residence, joining his family for some time. Plans were made for Nick to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends the following morning on the 26th. Just before dawn, Nick met up with his companions at Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County for a hunting trip. After spending a few hours in the woods without firing a single shot, they decided to leave and headed to a local diner for breakfast around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick suddenly stood up, appearing concerned, and exclaimed that he and Dawn hadn't opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick departed from the diner and returned home by 10 a.m., only to discover the tragic news of his wife's demise in a fire. Investigators revealed that the fire initially remained contained in the bedroom, sparked by a malfunctioning space heater. The blaze rapidly escalated due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper within the room, exacerbated by the multiple propane containers on the floor. Strangely, despite Nick informing his friends at the diner less than an hour earlier that they hadn't yet opened their Christmas gifts, he told the authorities that they had opened presents the previous night. He explained that due to Dawn feeling unwell, she went to bed without tidying up the wrapping paper. Additionally, Nick claimed to have received the propane tank as a Christmas gift. The couple had been relying on space heaters during the winter while their home was under renovation. These older space heaters lacked the safety features found in modern versions, leading to frequent fires and fatalities. The police found no discrepancies in Nick's account, and as a respected local pastor, he was a trusted figure in the community. This left the law enforcement with no reason to suspect anything other than an accidental death for his wife. Concerned for their pastor's well-being, Nick's congregation sought ways to support him during what they believed was an extremely difficult time. Pastor Robert even proposed attempting to resurrect Dawn through prayer, but Nick declined, citing his wish to spare her from any potential suffering. This refusal surprised Robert, given Nick's previous willingness to participate in church activities, including the exorcisms they had attempted before. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, immediately suspected Nick's involvement in Dawn's death. Convinced it was not an accident, she urged her husband to approach the police, but this never happened. Within days, Dawn's death was officially deemed accidental and the Bremerton police handed the case over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had already submitted a request to process Dawn's life insurance policy. Family and friends found it peculiar that Nick was dealing with the life insurance so quickly after Dawn's passing. However, considering the couple's substantial debt and Nick's aspirations for the youth camp, they rationalized his urgency for the money. Some church members found Nick's grieving unusual, but they refrained from expressing concerns, assuming everyone copes differently. The church community organized a celebration of life events serving as Dawn's funeral, where family and friends gathered to share stories and commemorate her life amid their sorrow. Nick remained composed throughout and delivered a 45-minute eulogy. Friends stumbled upon photos of Dawn tucked away, suggesting he wanted to discard them. Nick displayed a harsh and insensitive attitude not just towards church members, but also to neighbors and friends. Nick shockingly engaged in an intimate relationship with Diana, Dawn's own mother, under the pretense of mourning as a widower. Nick's behavior had become intolerable even for Pastor Robert, resulting in Nick being asked to depart from Christ Community Church. On April 10, 2001, Sandy met with the district attorney who offered her immunity in exchange for testimony about a secret from December 26, 1997. Nick allegedly confessed to Sandy that morning, but their call was interrupted. Sandy later spoke with Nick again, but he only said, "It's done." Eventually, when Sandy confronted Nick, he confessed to administering a significant overdose of Benadryl to Dawn and suffocating her by placing a plastic bag over her face. The tragic aspect is that Dawn remained partially conscious, witnessing her husband suffocating her through the plastic bag. After ensuring she was no longer alive, he strategically arranged old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, positioning them beneath her body, and placed the propane tanks near the bed. He arranged the heater in a way that it would start a fire, intending to destroy any evidence of a crime, and instead staged the incident as an accidental fire. Dawn's autopsy showed no soot or carbon monoxide, leading the pathologist to attribute her death to an accidental fire, overlooking evidence of carbon monoxide's impact on blood cells. Despite high Benadryl levels, they deemed it insufficient to cause respiratory failure, dismissing the possibility. Notably, the crime scene photos revealed newspapers beneath Dawn's body, an unsettling detail that largely went unnoticed. While a fire marshal raised suspicions and conversed with the police, the ultimate decision regarding the accidental nature of Dawn's death did not fall within his jurisdiction. Nick was arrested on September 12, 2001 at a Kinko's parking lot, where he firmly denied any involvement in Dawn's death, attributing his arrest to the church's attempts at sabotage. Despite his claims that the church members could inflict significant harm, Nick faced first-degree murder charges, with bail set at $750,000. Sandy's narrative conveyed to investigators appeared unusual, adding to the frustration stemming from the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick as a suspect or making an arrest. Her reason for cooperating was equally frustrating, driven by anger over Nick's involvement with other women from the church and a sense of exploitation. Nick appeared before a judge and pleaded not guilty. He claimed that his church had cast a curse upon him, alleging that Pastor Robert exerted a malevolent influence beyond the comprehension of the police. Nick's trial began, leading to a change in the charges due to the prosecutor's doubts about the judge's inclination toward the death penalty initially sought. The charge of first-degree murder was amended to aggravated first-degree murder, carrying a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This change in charges was a result of the arson Nick had committed, which enabled the revised charge. Witnesses, including the women who had personal relationships with Nick and various church members who had received counseling from him, provided testimonies that revealed information about Nick's conduct to the jury. These accounts highlighted the substantial influence the church had over their lives, detailing their experiences of alleged visions and direct messages they believed were from God, which Nick took advantage of for the purposes of justification and manipulation. Smith's daughter testified, recounting how she was introduced to Nick through her father and how Nick had groomed her during her teenage years, with their sexual relationship beginning shortly after Dawn's death and continuing until the daughter eventually moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts also testified, highlighting that Dawn's body contained crucial evidence about the events of that day. However, these important indicators were disregarded due to Nick's status as a pastor. Despite the unusual lack of soot and carbon monoxide exposure for someone who was alive and breathing during a fire, the defense strongly contested these allegations, concentrating their efforts on portraying Sandy as the jealous, vengeful ex-partner who fabricated accusations upon discovering Nick's infidelity with multiple women. Nevertheless, on December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic demise, the jury deliberated for only a day before delivering a guilty verdict for aggravated first-degree murder against Nick. During the subsequent sentencing on February 7, 2003, Nick addressed the courtroom, which included Dawn's friends and family. He vehemently maintained his innocence while expressing remorse for his actions and sorrow over their loss. Acknowledging that Dawn deserved better, Nick was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, in February 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court led to a revision of his life sentence. The appeal argued that since Dawn had already died due to Nick suffocating her, The original charge of aggravated first-degree murder for death by arson did not align with her actual cause of death. The defense argued that Nick, therefore, did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the appeal, changing Nick's sentence to 26 years in prison. While in prison, Nick has actively supported educational initiatives and co-founded the Environmental Advancement Reintegration Network. He initiated a waste management system employing worm composting and even delivered a TED Talk centered on sustainability. Unfortunately, it is indicated that he will become eligible for parole in 2025 and could potentially be released soon. Dawn has passed, but her memory lives on. Sadly, the life she chose with the person she believed was her true love did not turn out to be the reality she had hoped for. This ultimately led to a betrayal that resulted in her heartbreaking and untimely death. Our heartfelt prayers and thoughts go out to her departed soul and the loved ones she left behind. The case of Selena Keyjo, Mary Duggan, and Jana Rowe. Two women were targets of a man who liked to target young women in California. They lost their lives at the hands of the same man just years apart. It took 3 decades for the man responsible to be brought to justice. In 1981, 20-year-old Selena Keyjo's deceased body was found under bushes near an apartment building in Montclair in San Bernardino County. She was strangled. 5 years later, in 1986, 22-year-old Mary Duggan's life was ended. Her body was found in the trunk of her car in a parking lot in the Los Angeles suburb of Burbank. She was also strangled. The cases went cold for decades until 2019, when they were linked to Horace Van Val's using investigative genetic genealogy. On November 15, 2019, Waltz was arrested in Inglewood during a traffic stop. At his trial in August 2022, the prosecution argued that Waltz was a sexually motivated serial perpetrator. The defense argued that he had consensual intercourse with the women and someone else ended their lives. Waltz described himself as a swinger and said that he could not remember meeting the victims. The prosecutors also said that a re-examination of evidence showed a DNA link between Waltz and a third slaying in Ventura County, where 25-year-old Jana Rowe was strangled and left on a trash pile. The prosecutor noted during Waltz's trial that DNA evidence, which links the defendant to DNA from male DNA found in Jana Rowe's mouth and private parts, was not available for testing when Waltz was acquitted of her 1988 slaying in Ventura County. Noting that he cannot be retried for that crime, but the jury could use it as pattern evidence. The 9-man, 3-woman panel deliberated for about 3 hours. The jurors also found true the special circumstance allegations of multiple slayings. Slayings during an assault involving both women and slaying during sodomy involving Selena. Waltz's attorney, Damon L. Hobdy, told the jurors that despite the DNA evidence, the prosecutors failed to prove that his client, who alleged that he was a swinger, assaulted and strangled the women. Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman told the jurors at the end of her closing argument, to believe the defendant's story, you would have to throw out all your common sense. You would have to believe this defendant is the most unlucky person on the planet to have 3 women all turn up deceased with the defendant's male DNA inside them. Waltz has been unable to explain any of the evidence tying him to the slayings in this case, including DNA evidence found on or in the bodies of each of the women who were discovered either fully or partially nude. The defense lawyer countered that the prosecution did not prove that Waltz is guilty. He said the following, urging the jury to acquit Waltz of both slayings. If the evidence shows he is not guilty, which it does, do your duty. He acknowledged that his client, a swinger who cheated on his wives and girlfriends, is not perfect. But the defense attorney said that does not prove his client is a serial perpetrator. While on the stand, Waltz told the jurors that he did not remember Mary or Selena and was not responsible for their slayings or that of Jana, whom he admitted he knew. Waltz said, "My male DNA means I may have had intercourse with the person. It does not mean I took their lives. I am telling you, I did not slay anyone." On August 18, 2022, Horace Van Valtz Jr. was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree slaying in connection with the cases of Mary Duggan in 1986 and Selena Kehoe in 1981. He was sentenced on September 19th to 2 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole. District Attorney Gaskin said, "Using the latest in technology and forensics, we were able to secure a conviction against someone who targeted young women. I hope that today's guilty verdict provides some comfort to the victims' families, who have waited more than 3 decades to see this result." The investigative technology used in Valtz's case involved detectives accessing commercial DNA databases, loading DNA material from the crime, and finding a relatives match that can point toward a suspect. Mary's mother said in a statement, "When you get past the shock of hearing your daughter is no longer alive, you wonder who is out there that did this. Then you just miss her so much every day at every family gathering and holiday. You do not think of who after so many years. It is one thing that your child passed away at only 22 years old. It is a whole other thing to know she suffered at the hands of a monster." Selena's sister, Sabrina Plord, said it was difficult to sit through Valtz's trial. She said after hearing the graphic details of what happened to her sister, "I did not know how bad it was until I came to court." She urged the judge to impose the strongest punishment available. Also in court were the parents and brother of Jana Rowe, whose slaying Valtz had been acquitted of decades ago in Ventura County. Jana's mother, Marcia Connor, called Valtz's latest trial bittersweet, saying she was thankful for the outcome, though her family has had to live with the knowledge that they would never find justice. She said that she wanted to thank everyone involved in solving this case and bringing it to trial, and hoped that the verdict brings some closure to the families that have suffered through these past long years of heartbreak. Valtz's attorney, Hobdy, read a statement from his client's sister, Cheryl, who wrote that he has been a good brother and friend. She said in the statement, "We will always love him as Jesus Christ loves him." Valtz maintains that he is innocent. The case of Jane Doe. On February 28, 1983, 2 men searching for a piece of metal to repair a car's timing chain stumbled upon a gruesome discovery inside an abandoned apartment building at 5365 Clemens Avenue. In the basement, they found the body of a young girl wearing only a dirty yellow sweater. She was positioned face down, naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with a red and white nylon rope. Her head was missing, and it was determined that she had been strangled 3 to 5 days before her body was dumped in the basement. Initially, investigators suspected she might have been a prostitute, but upon closer inspection, they discovered that she had not yet developed breasts, indicating she had not reached puberty. This led to further examination of the case in the following week. It was concluded that the victim was not killed at the location where she was discovered, as no traces of blood were found by the body. Her head had been severed cleanly by a large blade, possibly a carving knife. She was estimated to be between 8 and 11 years old and was prepubescent but had been sexually assaulted. She wore only a V-neck yellow long-sleeve sweater and 2 layers of pink and purple nail polish. Her head has never been found, but the fingerprints, footprints, and DNA information have been collected. Because there were no distinct marks or deformities on her body except for spina bifida occulta, it is unlikely that she would be identified. She was given 2 nicknames to honor her life, Hope and Little Jane Doe. 4 missing girls have been ruled out as the victim, as well as the Northampton County Jane Doe from North Carolina, who was ruled out to be the remaining parts of the body. She was approximately 4'10" to 5'6" tall when she was alive. After 10 months, her burial took place in December 1983. In February 2013, authorities decided to exhume the remains of the victim in order to gather further forensic information. However, the body had been misplaced, along with many other remains, in Washington Park Cemetery by 2013 due to negligence in maintaining cemetery records. Her body wasn't located until late June. To find it, investigators used a camera calibration technique to determine the exact location where a photograph of the casket had been taken on the day of the burial. After testing bone samples, it was determined that the victim likely spent a significant portion of her life in one of 10 southeastern states, including Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Her sweater had previously been sent to a psychic in Florida, but it was never returned and was presumed lost in the mail. The victim was largely believed to be one of Vernon Brown's victims. In the mid-1970s, Vernon Brown had been convicted of molesting a 12-year-old girl and served 4 years in Indiana before his release in 1980. After his release, 9-year-old Kimberly Campbell was found sexually assaulted and strangled in a vacant home owned by his grandmother. Despite being the prime suspect in her murder, there was insufficient evidence to charge him. Years later, Vernon lived in St. Louis, Missouri, under the fake name of Thomas Turner. On October 24, 1926, Vernon just arrived back home after picking up his stepchildren from school. At approximately 3 p.m., he was sitting on his front porch watching children walk home after being dropped off by the school bus. During this time, 9-year-old Janet Perkins was passing by on her 15-minute walk home. That's when Vernon took notice and enticed Janet into his home. Although the stepchildren saw her come inside, Vernon ordered them to their bedrooms and locked the doors from the outside. Moments later, Vernon led Janet Perkins to his basement, where he bound her feet and one hand with a wire coat hanger. He then proceeded to strangle her with a rope, all while his stepchildren could hear her screams through the vents. 3 days after the murder, police arrested Vernon when they discovered 2 trash bags containing Janet's body in an alley behind his home. While in prison, authorities frequently questioned Vernon about other potential victims, especially little Jane Doe, but he never admitted to her or any other murders. Police suspect Vernon Brown may be connected to at least 20 unsolved murders. He was executed in February 2005, but he never confessed to the killing of little Jane Doe, and her identity remains a mystery to this day. Thank you so much for watching and exploring these cold cases with me. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to NA Cold Cases for more deep dives into the unsolved and unexplained.